not here because of the big, we're not here for the big salaries. We're all here because we want to serve residents better. And at the same time, we understand the challenges that we can face in doing that in our own work. And so the goal of this workshop and other workshops that we offer through Innovate US, which goes out of a program we've been doing in New Jersey for a little while, to offer skills training to public servants, really focuses on questions of the ways in which we can take advantage of new technology, of better sources of data, of new forms and more equitable forms of community engagement to deliver better services, to make more effective policies, and to serve, again, residents better and ultimately serve the public. But really thinking about how we do these things in ways that are cognizant of the ways that we work in government. So I want to say that from the outset, that this is not an academic conversation about how to build skills in the abstract. It's about how do we do the hard work of what we're doing in government, where we have only so many hours in the day, very demanding political masters, a very demanding agenda that it requires us often to work on many, many different issues, and increasingly accelerated timelines, as we've seen during COVID, where we've really had to get faster at how we solve problems for people. So what we're doing here is really helping to think about how do we get from idea to implementation? What is the pathway that we need to take to get from idea to implementation faster? This is another version of that pathway, this one from Nesta, which is the innovation think tank of the UK that does a huge amount of work in public sector innovation. Instead of a pathway, they have what they call the innovation spiral. It's another graphic, but that essentially just conveys what a lot of policy analysis, project management, or other disciplines really will talk about as essentially just having a plan for getting stuff done. And famously, and you've probably heard this quote before, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. Really what we're talking about here is a set of skills that help us, I think, to become more effective at doing the work that we're trying to accomplish. So I think it's extraordinarily important to think holistically, even before we dive into talking about today's topic of problem definition, to recognize that problem definition is one step along a pathway for getting from idea to implementation, and that it's extremely useful to think about what that pathway is, what that timeline is from beginning to end, and more importantly, from end to beginning. What are we trying to accomplish and backing up to ensure that we're affording enough time for each step along the way? So I want to make sure to make that clear, because we're going to talk today about problem definition, about how important it is to spend time on it. But I hope that we'll have a conversation about how much time is enough time, how much time is not enough time, because we don't want to spend so much time that we never get to what comes next, which includes really engaging with stakeholders and engaging with data, nor that we fail to give enough time to it, that we don't adequately address the problems that we're trying to solve. And I'll talk in a minute about why that's so important. Let me say as we go along that there are a lot of people here. So we're going to have time for breakouts and smaller group conversations to make this more interactive in just a moment. But you should please feel free to continue the conversation in the chat. We're all, I think, pretty used to from Zoom now, kind of operating in 2 dimensions, or 3 dimensions, I should say. One where there's some talking going on here, but the other where there's some typing going on here. Because I think the reason we get together across states is that there's so much learning to be had from your peers and from one another, that I hope that you will share your own experiences as we go along, not just the experiences that I have to share. And Hannah and Kate, I'll also ask you, since I have the slides open, I can't see the chat at the same time. If you'd flag for me anything exciting that's going on there that we want to bring to the attention of the whole group, please do so. But please feel free to watch both of those and to continue to type in the chat even as I'm talking. So everything that we're talking about today really needs to be thought of against that backdrop of how do we implement real world solutions that benefit and improve people's lives. And it is one tool in a toolkit. It's one skill, if you will, along this pathway of change that begins with problem definition, but then includes a whole bunch of other things we know we need to do today, which includes engaging with people, or sometimes called human-centered design, to understand how we do things, to use data to better define the problem, to think about how do we rapidly go out there and look for solutions, and a whole bunch of other things, each one of which is both the subject of live workshops that we do and also covered in the At Your Own Pace course that we also offer, which you can do on your own time, that provide introductions to each of these skills, but that are interconnected as we think about how do we make that progress from idea to implementation. It is not contrary to what I said at the outset and the image I showed you, it really isn't a linear path simply from the beginning to the end, and then we all declare victory and go home, problem solved. It is a circle. It's an iterative process where as we start to dive in and think about the problem, that leads us sometimes to solutions, but in turn, sometimes we have to go back as we figure out what solutions are going to be viable in our agency for what we do, leads us back to thinking about the problem. And again, it's a process we often have to come back to, revising and revisiting the problem as we go, because we're aiming always along the way to have some quick wins, to achieve some successes that will get our superiors to say yes to letting us do more projects, that'll get the public to engage with the services that we're providing and to build greater trust with what we're doing. So this is often a process of developing quick wins, iterating on them, and continuing to refine the problem as we go, hopefully at every stage of the process, using data and using what we could call collective intelligence, or just more simply, what we might just call public engagement. So how do we get smart from data, and how do we get smart from people at every step along the way? And that's part of what we're going to do here today, is talk about how do we define a problem really in ways that are data driven and that are participatory, that use engagement as we go along. So again, deep dives on both of those topics in other workshops. Today, we're going to focus on this first piece, which is the question of how we define the problem. So I want to ask you first at the outset, I'm going to just send you a quick poll. We're really curious whether you have had any kind of formal introduction to problem definition before in your work. So I'm sure you've heard the term, but we're really interested, and also please, we're only asking you yes, no, please feel free to say more in the chat. Really interested in how many of you have had any kind of training in problem definition in your prior work. And going to ask you a second question in just a moment that really gets to sort of the core skill of problem definition, which is the question of whether you engage in any root cause analysis in your work. So let me pause with that for a second, and maybe we can, I'm gonna share this poll with you guys. Whoops, I have to, oh, we're already sharing, my apologies. So you can see here that about 2/3 of you have said you have not, and a quarter of you, sorry, my math is, clearly need a coffee. That is 3/4 when last I checked, not 2/3. This may be why I went into government, have said no, and 1/4 have said yes. We'd be really interested to hear from those 1/4 where you've learned this, whether it's been in graduate school or undergraduate, or whether it's something that you've developed on the job. Hannah, tell me, I'm sorry, I just want to understand, did people see the second poll yet or not yet?
I'll send that out right now.
Okay, thank you, because I want to keep going. So we'll push that out, and I'm going to keep going through now. I'm going to move forward on the slides, but let me tell you what's coming here. We're going to ask you 2 more questions. Well, I keep talking at the same time, if that's okay. So core to this question, and it may be that some of you don't think about it as problem definition, and the concept of root cause analysis is a vocabulary that's more familiar to you. I'll be really interested to see what you say. Okay, I'm going to keep going forward while Hannah continues to ask you some of the poll questions. You can see there's a diversity in the answers to the question, and we'll send out that third question now in just a second. There are a lot of problems in the world, and a lot of very big problems. Some of you may be familiar with the Global Sustainable Development Goals that 190 countries have agreed to. It's a very nice and useful way for framing and talking about problems by the number. So you don't even have to describe them. You can just say 16 or 5 or 2, which is how UN people like to talk about it. But we have a lot of challenges that in the public sector we work on that we might use the term wicked problems, or what some people call wicked problems, or what I would just sort of simply put, say these are really problems to which we don't have, not only do we not have readily agreed upon solutions to those problems, but we often don't agree on what the problem is itself. So we are working on problems that exist within a highly partisan climate that is increasingly fractured in this country, where we have a lot of disagreement even about the existence of a problem, let alone about what the cause of it is. And that's one of the main reasons why it's incredibly important to spend time thinking about what the problem is. And you've probably seen this quote. You might have seen it next to that. You always have those, dorm rooms always have 2 posters. They have that kitten that says hang in there, and then they often have this one next to it. But it's really important to spend time really thinking about what the problem is, and doing that in conjunction with, in conversation with the people that we're trying to help, because we have to be sure that we have alignment about what is the problem according to them, not simply according to us. Not simply the problem as we understand it, but the problem as they understand it, so that we can develop solutions that are actually responsive. So that's what our goal is to do today, is to have you come away with some very practical methods that you can use in your own work, that you can use with your teams for thinking about problems and thinking about them in a participatory way that allows you to have conversations with your team, across your agency, across your department, and again, ultimately with the public about the problem that you're facing. Okay, let's start with a problem that all of us are extraordinarily familiar with from our everyday lives. Which is the problem of people wearing masks during COVID. So if I asked you, and all of us have seen this issue of people not wearing masks when they should be in various settings, if I asked you, and maybe you could put some of this in the chat, if I asked you, why is it that people, what's the problem that causes people not to wear masks, what would you say? Maybe I can get a couple of things in the chat. Why is it that people don't wear masks? Kate, I'm going to call on you first while I'm waiting for people to type. Give me one reason. Why don't people wear masks?
Misinformation.
Misinformation. Okay, and that's what Michelle says here too. Thank you. We're getting lots of things in here too. A bunch of people, Maureen, Michelle, both putting in misinformation. However, I'm getting the one that happened to me this morning. Carrie says fogs up your glasses. It's uncomfortable, says Abilene. We've also got, oops, I'm scrolling up here. Al also says prioritizing comfort. So a lot of things about comfort. Carl Hartkopf mentions tribal loyalty, which I'm going to take to mean, Carl, this is sort of political affiliation. This has become a very politically partisan issue. And in some geographies, depending on where you are, wearing a mask signifies almost affiliation with one political party and or one viewpoint, and not wearing a mask is the opposite, or it's become extremely sort of tribal, as you put it, which I think is a great way of putting it. Pamela adds, we don't have information as to why. As you can see, very simply here, there are a lot of different underlying causes of why people don't wear masks. And depending on whether the cause is misinformation or uncomfortable, to take two off your list, I'm going to have very, very different solutions to the problem. So it's obviously, if what I'm going to do is, let's say I assume the problem is that it's expensive to get masks, or people don't have access to masks. Remember back in the early days of the pandemic, first of all, in the early days of the pandemic, we were told not to wear masks. And then after that, you couldn't get a mask to save your life. You couldn't get toilet paper, a mask. You know, you remember those days of the toilet paper that runs on toilet paper? So it was very, very hard to come by. So it's if what I'm going to do is to start to provide free masks for people, sometimes you see like in the post office or the bank or different institutions who now give away masks. That's a great response or solution to the problem of lack of masks, so they're too expensive or people don't have access or can't afford them. It is, however, not a very effective solution to the problem of misinformation or the problem of tribalism, or frankly, to the problem of discomfort and the fact that they're not fun to wear. So all of that to just give a very obvious example to make clear the point that defining the problem matters. Otherwise, I'm going to come up with a solution that isn't a response to the actual root causes of the problem. And the root causes of that problem are going to differ. They're going to differ even for an issue that, you know, is everybody suffers from, like COVID affects everybody. But the root cause of that problem of mask wearing is going to differ from one neighborhood to the next, from one city to the next, from one state to the next, and imply very, very different solutions that we need. This is another just humorous illustration of the same phenomenon. If you think about this question, here's a solution. I'm going to build a very expensive bridge. If my goal is to get to the other side, and we invest in, we ask the question, why are you trying to get to the other side? Well, if it turns out my house is on one side and my office is on the other, then maybe the cheaper and easier solution is to give me a laptop so that I can simply connect to Zoom and get to work. Or, you know, maybe it's a rowboat, or maybe it's something else. You can probably come up with a better caption for this cartoon. And I invite you to do that. But again, meant to just illustrate the same point, that we're not going to come up with the best solutions if we're not thinking about what the problem is and what the root causes are, and doing that in a very specific way. So this is a point that was made over 100 years ago by the educational theorist John Dewey, the famous American philosopher. He wrote one of many books called this one, How We Think, in which he says that defining the problem is essentially the essence of thinking. This is the most fundamental thing that we do, and it is the most fundamental thing that we need to do in terms of how we teach students and how we learn. I think the most important reason why we need to define the problem is because it helps us to engage other people. It helps us to get other people to collaborate with us. And if we don't clearly define the problem, it's going to be really hard to get a company to provide public-private partnership money that we need to do something. It's going to be very hard to get a citizen to engage in and take up a policy or a service that we're trying to deliver. It's going to be very hard to hire people. If we simply hire people to be deputy this or assistant that, or deputy assistant director of this or that, it's going to be a lot less engaging way or recruitment tool than if we actually explain to people, these are the problems that we're trying to solve in our office. We are here to help improve sustainability and remediate the effects of climate change, or we're trying to address improve water quality or air quality for people, or we're trying to reduce COVID or help veterans. Those kinds of issues are much more compelling ways to get interesting and engaging and passionate people to work with us, whether it's to hire new people or to recruit other people on our team or in our agency to get engaged. Lastly, I think it's incredibly important because in the public sector, we most often work on problems that we don't suffer from. So this is a big distinction with how you might have studied problem definition if you did it, let's say, in college as part of an entrepreneurship class. So if you took entrepreneurship or any kind of a basic business school class, they're going to teach you problem definition. But they're going to teach you from the perspective of the pilot who suffers from the problem of having to carry his bags through the airport, and thereby, lo and behold, ta-da, because he suffers from this problem, invents the rollerboard suitcase. So that's great when we're talking about starting a company or starting a business. You know, the private entrepreneur suffers from the problem, comes up with, lo and behold, the solution. In government, we have to work on problems day in and day out that do not affect us personally, and yet we have to deliver solutions to them. So that's why I think it's so important to thinking about the problem as it affects the people we're trying to help. Okay, so let me pause with that, see if we have any comments, questions, reactions, and then I'm going to go on to start to talk about some practical approaches, and we're going to get into talking about your problems at work or at home. This applies equally. So any urgent things going on in the chat that I'm missing?
Nothing, just a ton of the old pieces on masks, but nothing new. Go ahead.
Okay, if we can solve that problem, that might be a nice outcome here, especially if you can find one that doesn't fog up my glasses. I'd be excited. All right, very basically, to start the process, this is not rocket science. This is what will seem pretty straightforward. We have to start by articulating in writing, because we have to share it with other people, what is the problem that we're trying to tackle, and trying to narrow that definition of the problem to actually talk about when it occurs, where it occurs, and who's impacted. Let me say a little bit more about what I mean by that. This is a narrowing process. This is a process of taking the big block of marble and that I'll call the challenge or the issue, and whittling it down, as we did with the mask example, to actually find the statute within it, to find that more specific problem that we can actually do something about. And let me give you another example. Maybe this one's a little too politically fraught, but it was in my inbox this morning. I was in a conversation about the topic of election subversion, a topic that a lot of people are talking about now as people question the integrity of our election system, question the results of our last election, couple of elections, wonder about the security of our electoral system and whether we can have faith in whether we can have faith in elections in this country or not. If I gave you the problem of election subversion, that is like the big block of marble. That is an enormous, insurmountable, throw up your hands kind of problem. Or fill in another problem, climate change, COVID, what's on your mind today? These are big, big issues that we have to, these are big, big issues, and we really have to be able to get narrower about what it is that we're actually facing. I'm going to go back here for a second. Again, it may be a topic that affects everybody in the world, but we can't work on everybody in the world all at the same time. What's that great movie? Everything All at Once, all at the same time. Everything all at once, all at the same. I'm getting it wrong. The one that's nominated for the Oscar. Everything All at Once, something like that. With the work we do, we can't do everything all at once, all at the same time. So as you're thinking about it, as we're about to go into breakouts, talking to your peers about the problem that you're working on, start to think about a problem, but I want you to start to think about it and describe it in a way that is as narrow as possible. That is to say, can you pinpoint a community, a neighborhood, a place that is affected where you want to do your work? Can you think about when it actually happens, the problem? Now, when a lot of problems we might say, oh, always. Some problems are seasonal. They affect more us, maybe it's when it rains. Maybe it's when it's dark. Maybe it's when it's cold. Some problems we may think about the when in terms of the urgency. So some things, if I take the issue, for example, that was so front and center last year when Texas had the terrible power outages, there is obviously a chronic, ongoing issue about the Texas power grid, and this is in other places too, that is a long-term generational problem. And then there's the urgent, immediate issue of we have blackouts right now. We have a lack of heat right now. So the when may be a question of whether it's chronic or whether it's more urgent. And we're talking about the where. Again, try to be specific. Even if lots of people are affected, what is the specific geography where you want to start? If you were going to pilot an approach, if you want to go talk to people who are affected, can you identify a more specific geography? Can you identify a more specific community? Even if the answer is the public is affected, again, we can't test our assumptions about the problem if we're not identifying a specific geography. So this is essentially a culture metaphor. I'll give you another one. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, where we're going from something much bigger and broader, the issue or the challenge, and trying to end up with a more specific definition of the problem and its root causes, so that I can actually then understand and define the problem by talking to people who are affected, so I can go gather data about the problem and understand it better, so that I can test some solutions in a very specific geography, and so I can take action more quickly. So for yourself, think about the answers to these questions, a problem that you're working on in your own work. And we want to send you into breakouts. This is just the same questions again, and we'll put those in the chat. We want to send you into breakouts to talk with one another about a problem that you are facing. Excuse me, my problem is I have a cold. Again, trying to be specific about one geography. We're going to put you in groups of about half a dozen or so. Again, maybe not everybody will get to talk the whole time, so take turns as best you can. Try to do some writing down for yourselves, but use this as an occasion to try to test out a problem definition on some of the people you're talking to. And then one of the ideas, and then what we're going to do is then we're going to come back. And actually talk about some very specific techniques that we can deploy in order to help you refine that problem definition. So let me just check before we go into breakouts. Kate, I think we have had some people and Hannah, some people have just come into the room. So I want to make sure, do we need to repeat any of those instructions, or is everybody clear on what we need to do, and how long do we have for the breakouts here?
So I've assigned everyone to a room. Kate has popped the questions into the chat, which we can do so again if anyone joined more recently. And we're going to give everyone 10 minutes in their groups. And we ask that someone from each group volunteer to capture a little bit what has been talked about and share back to the wider group when we'll have a 10-minute open discussion after we're finished with the breakout. So we're ready to send people into the rooms. Beth, are you okay with that? Great. We'll give you 10 minutes.
I am good with that. And again, it's a chance. I know that's going to be super brief and deeply unsatisfying, but we want to make sure we get you out of here on time. So do some doodling for yourself, even if you don't fully get a chance to talk in the conversation, but we hope you get to meet some peers and exchange some ideas about what you're working on. And we're going to go back into to refine those problem definitions after we come back. So 10 minutes, and then we'll see you back in a minute.
Okay, Kate, I think, hold on, let me text you.
Did you see Beth's note about pulling us into the same breakout?
I just did now, hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
And Hannah, for the folks who are in here, should they have an invitation to join a breakout?
Everyone does. Yeah.
Okay, why don't you get us into the room with Beth? Thanks.
Okay. How do I add an extra room? Now that it's manual. Hi, Beth. Hold on. Let me create
I think we
another
should
room.
work on first, don't worry about moving us first. I would worry about moving other people out of here into their rooms. I think we can manually move them.
Okay. I mean, everyone has been assigned their room, so it's.
I believe you can move them into a room now.
I can move them into other rooms. That works.
They must not be at their desks. They logged in and now they're not there, or they're stuck in some way. I'm not an owner, so I can't do any moving.
It looks like I can move people between rooms, but I can't force people who haven't accepted entering their breakout room into a room.
Okay, so we'll just move ourselves for a moment.
Okay, so here's the issue, is that I assigned everyone manually so that we would be leading a session each. And now it looks like I can't add another room.
That's okay. Anyway, I think for people who are stuck, we might want to just put them in. We can broadcast to everybody, or we can tell people just instructions about how to move to the room. Anyway, what I'd love to do is you can let me know at the end if we have time to do a second breakout, because if we're only doing 10 minutes now, that's very short.
I made it so everything, Kate said some people leave on the hour. So I made it that these breakouts and then going back to your presentation fits by ending on the hour. But if we could do another breakout with people who stay for 4 or 30, or do that for, sorry,
so
general.
Kate, you typically do, oh, we have another person in the waiting room. We have to move them back into their room. Thank you. And you're still recording. Oops, don't forget to pause the recording.
We can cut that.
Welcome back, everybody. We'll just give it a second for people to come back in. And I'll look to Hannah and Kate to tell me if have our quorum back again.
I think you've got about 13 seconds before people are fully swept back in.
Okay. We'll give it 13 more seconds. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're going to restart. And just a quick note as to process for a second. Is that what we're going to do is I'm going to keep going to finish some of the core of the points I want to make to you. And then what we do is we leave half an hour at the end for conversation, for questions. That'll be a chance to kind of report out and to go deeper on some of the problem definitions that you've started. So I want to make sure that we get through some of the tips and tricks that are promised and do that right off the bat. And then please hope that you will stick around for the conversation where we can actually talk more about applying this to your own projects. And really do that during in a few minutes. So please hold on to some of your readouts from the sessions, but this way people who have a shorter amount of time get the most out of this, and then people have a little bit more. We have this booked for 90 minutes. Really, we can talk about how this applies to your work. Okay. So we got started really by talking about narrowing from a broader issue to a more narrower, smaller problem. And ultimately, the right problem to tackle is one that is going to be narrowly defined, that is narrow enough and small enough to take action on. Some of you may listen to the Freakonomics podcast with Stephen Dubner. There's a good example of this that I like from that I heard from him, which was about the problem of educational outcomes. So that's a huge topic. Getting kids to read better, that's an enormous issue. Fast forward, long story short, this is a project that really very narrowly focused the project. In this case, it was focused on China. It was focused on rural China. It was focused on on one province in Yunnan province. It was focused on specific villages there. And then it zeroed in very specifically on kids who were reading poorly because they couldn't see the board. Now, does that tackle all reading for all kids in all of Yunnan province? No, it doesn't. And there are lots of different root causes for why children can't read or why we see inequitable outcomes in terms of who does poorly in terms of education. In this case, a very narrow framing to focus on children who have trouble seeing the board allowed for a very cheap, a very quick, and a very effective solution to the problem. Another example closer to home. San Francisco, some of you may be here from California, may be familiar with this project called Transbase, which is a very specific project designed to respond to the problem of bicycle fatalities. But rather than trying to take, or even road fatalities wholesale, it's a lot to work on, or even bicycle fatalities, still pretty big, bicycle fatalities in San Francisco. What they did was they used data and visualization to understand exactly where fatalities were occurring and to really pinpoint the couple of intersections that really are 90% of where the fatalities are occurring. So we have another workshop, and again, in our course materials, we have a deeper dive just focused on the question of how to define the problem with data. And data can often help us to get narrower and figure out how to pinpoint a smaller scope to the problem that'll be much more tractable. Because if I say all fatalities in all of San Francisco, that's going to be very overwhelming. But if I can say, look, there are these two intersections where most of the accidents are occurring, it then becomes much faster and easier to solve the problem. One last example, this one, again, from further away. This project is called, in English, is called Risk Map. The original project is called Peta Bencana, and it essentially is designed to respond to the problem of fair weather flooding. They're active. It started in Indonesia. They're very active in Florida now too, and other geographies around the world. Similar to the San Francisco project, what they do is very specifically pinpoint where flooding is occurring, and they engage residents in doing that. So they have a very nice mobile response system where they're getting citizens to pinpoint in real time where the problem is occurring so they can identify those geographies and more quickly respond to the problem. The point is, where you can, go narrow, go specific, be specific in terms of geographies. The problem definition process always has to involve, and as a next step, you started with writing down what is the problem, or thinking about what's the problem, who's affected, where it happens, when it happens. The next step in this process, if we had a whole day to do this, is we would ask you about the root causes of the problem. We would ask you, as we did at the outset with the masks, why the problem is occurring. And so that's really important, is to do the exercise of saying to yourself, why is the problem happening? And to write down at least 3 to 5 root causes of the problem. And then in turn, to again say, well, okay, for that root cause, why is that problem happening? So I might say, again, why are people not wearing masks? Misinformation, Kate told us. Well, why is misinformation occurring? Well, misinformation is occurring. We can make a long list of reasons there, because politicians might give us bad information, because media companies are interested in making a lot of money, and conflict sells, and propagating falsehoods, helps to make money for social media companies. I can talk about the role that Facebook plays in helping to spread disinformation. Maybe I can talk about root causes of why people tend to, lack media literacy and don't look up information that they get online. I have to keep breaking it down to really figure out why a problem is happening, so that I can begin to address it and really figure out the problem that I want to tackle. Very often when we engage in this root cause analysis, this always asking why, always being like the child who says, why is the sky blue? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? The more that we do that, the more likely we are to identify a problem that actually we can tackle. So this 5 whys exercise, let me go back to this for a second. It's known as the 5 whys, was made famous by Toyota. It's a business school technique, and it's in the business school case literature. It was developed by Toyota as a way of essentially working with frontline engineers to try to understand why things were breaking down on the manufacturing line. And we want to do the same thing for ourselves, is to say, why is this problem actually occurring? And very often it will lead us to a much narrower, more specific and easier solution that we can very often do something about. Okay, so we want to always ask why. In that process, though, we have to be very careful to ensure that we continue to focus on the problem. It is so easy to jump ahead to talk about solutions. That's what is demanded of us, right? No political leader is, voted into office for delivering problems. They're there to deliver solutions. And so we are always supposed to come up with solutions. And therefore, it can become very easy to define the problem as a solution in disguise. What do I mean by that? It can be very easy to say, well, the problem is we don't have this website. Or the problem is we don't have this piece of legislation, or the problem is we don't have XYZ policy. You'll get to the solution soon enough. It's really important to take the time to really think about the problem before you dive into the solutions. As you're doing that problem definition and that articulation of root causes, you want to do so in as plain language as possible. Because again, we're not looking to use government acronyms and 3-letter abbreviations for agencies. We're trying to get people to help us. We're trying to get citizens to tell us what is the problem according to them. So we need to be pretty simple about how we talk about it. Okay, the right way then of, after we have written down our problem definition, after we have written down root causes of our problem, the next step is to think about how we can reframe the problem, how we can think about that problem differently, maybe than we did at the outset, particularly by getting input from other people. Because sometimes we don't see it for ourselves. We need a conversation with other people to be able to think about the problem differently. So maybe if you can't get right away to that eyeglasses solution, to that I have to focus on the kids who can't see in the board, maybe what I need to do is to turn the problem on its head and think about it in different ways. And let me talk about a few ways to do that real quick. Here I'm going to borrow some techniques from a book called The Art of Problem Solving, written by Russell Ackoff, who is actually the husband of Janet Yellen. That is a useless factoid. But he uses a problem, he illustrates a number of great illustrations and exercises. One of them is and I think the most useful one, is what's known as the classic slow elevator problem. Some of you may have come across this, forgive me if you've heard it before, but I think it's the best illustration. Here's how it goes. Hotel manager is getting constant complaints from his guests. The elevator is too slow, the elevator is too slow. So he calls in the engineer, who tells him it'll be $5 million to replace the hotel elevator. and get it to move faster. He goes, ooh, gee, $5 million. Business isn't so good this year. I can't afford $5 million. So he then, what does he do? He calls in the psychologist. And the psychologist says to him, you have to think about the problem differently. The problem is not that the elevator is too slow. The problem is that the wait is too annoying. The wait is too long. And therefore, the solution space is opened up. It's not simply about getting a new elevator now at $5 million. Instead, he can go out and buy a $5 mirror. He can put Muzak in the elevator. If you've ever been in the elevator and had one of those quiz screens that asks you trivia questions, that's cheaper than replacing the elevator, and that's why that's there. So you want to think about whether you can reframe the problem in different ways. So let me close out this portion by giving you 2 additional techniques for how you could reframe the problem. Positive deviance and defining the problem upstream. So what do I mean by positive deviance? I said don't use jargon. I'm now going to use some jargon. This is not a term that I coined. The term positive deviance comes from these guys, Monique and Jerry Sternen, development professionals from Save the Children, who are trying to tackle the problem of childhood hunger in rural Vietnam. So what they did was, instead of looking simply at how we can throw more money at the problem of hunger in rural Vietnam, was they said, let's look at the problem differently by looking for what they named the positive deviants, the people who are not experiencing the problem, the people who are equally poor in the same setting, rural Vietnam, rural villages, same demographics, but not experiencing the problem. And lo and behold, what they discovered is that there are some families whose kids are not malnourished, and those are the families that are actually feeding their children very small meals 5 times a day instead of once a day, and who are digging up small snails and bugs and other little bits of protein and mixing it with their children's rice. And so that helped to open up a whole new avenue of thinking about the problem, because they looked at the positive deviance. Another example closer to home, Eric Schadt, really famous mostly because he always wears a white polo shirt and khaki shorts in every weather, including the deep winter. So he's on covers of a lot of magazines because of his outfit, oddly enough. But what he really does, and what he's famous for, is he is a mathematician that works on the problems of genetic diseases like irritable bowel syndrome and other things. And what he does is he uses math to find people who have 2 recessive genes, so who should have a disease, but don't have the disease. So it'll be the 5 or 10 people who have those 2 recessive genes, but don't manifest the disease, that then help them to research cures to diseases out of the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. So positive deviance, looking at the people who don't have the problem, may be one way of hoping to think about the problem differently. Lastly, thinking about the problem upstream. There's a lot of talk about solving the problem upstream when Kamala Harris went to Latin America to try to address the immigration problem in the United States upstream. That's where you heard the news was constantly talking about upstream problem solving. Let me give you a simpler example. Lori Wise is a woman who works on the issue of animal rescue. But instead of asking the question, how do we get more people to adopt pets from shelters, she looks at the problem upstream. She asks the question, why are animals ending up in shelters in the first place? It's not because it turns out that people don't like their pets or that they're bad people. They put pets in shelters because they come upon hard times and they can't afford to feed their children and their pets. So you can solve the problem with a simple donation of pet food, which is much cheaper as a way to help people out of this problem and avoid the animal ever ending up in the kill shelter in the first place. Okay, so let me come back to what we talked about. Problem definition is an iterative process that goes from issue to narrower problem through multiple rounds of asking, what is the problem? Who's affected? When does it happen? Articulating the root causes of the problem, And again, trying to ask, why are those root causes happening? Reframing the problem by looking at it with other members of your team, with other people in your agency, across agencies, but most importantly, with those people who are most affected by the problem. So let me close out here with giving you one more exercise that we will send you and is available online that really asks the same set of questions. And this is one from Alf Bingham, the founder of a company called Incentive, which helps to create networks of people to solve problems in the world. And he uses this acronym, LASSO. So he says these are the questions you should be asking yourself as you're defining your own problem. You can read this for yourself, but what I want to do is to pick out just 2 or 3 things on this list here to really point out. He makes very clear again that it's extraordinarily important to limit the scope. Have I narrowed this enough that I can actually do something about it? Have I described something really specific? Again, lots of ways of saying the same thing. And importantly, have I identified something that will be supported? And I think that's important. And let me say what he means by that and what I think what we should mean by that. Problems have a lot of root causes. There is never one root cause to a wicked and complex problem. We already heard with masks, they're uncomfortable, they're expensive, they're tribal, there's misinformation. All of these things are right. There's not, one isn't more right than the other, although one may be more right in a specific geography than another. But even within that list, there's going to be the right problem for me to work on. So I may be in a position to do something from where I sit in my agency. Maybe I'm an information and communications professional, and I can do something about one aspect of a problem that's going to be different from somebody who's sitting on the procurement side, or the IT side, or the grants management side, or the program delivery side. So lots of root causes. The right root cause has to be real, but it also has to be something that I care about, that I'm passionate about, that I want to work on, and that I'm in a position to do something about given where I sit in my agency. Okay, and now I want to make sure that we are, because we're going to move into our Q&A discussion. And if we have time, some further effort to refine our own problem statements using some of these additional techniques we've talked about. So I want to start to tee up some questions as I do my last 2 slides. Hannah and Kate, just give us some advice about how you want to do Q&A, and then we'll, before I wrap up my last slide, but I'll give people a chance to think about their questions.
We encourage people to unmute and ask a question, but also feel free to raise your hand or pop a question in the chat, and we'll be monitoring it and feeding them to Beth.
In case you're a Teams user and don't know, on Zoom, the way to raise your hand is, I believe, to push reactions people should have at the bottom of their screen. If you see a button that says reactions, and under reactions, you'll see hand raise. So I think with so many people in the room, it might be helpful to do that. You can also type in the chat to say, I want to ask something, and then we'll try to get a bit of a queue going. So please let us know if you'd like to dive in. We already have one hand up. Please feel free to raise additional hands, and we'll start a queue, and we'll organize some of the conversation and talk about how this applies to your work. Okay, while people are thinking about questions, let me round out last 2 or 3 slides here. One way, and what we said before, to think about the problem is to do so in collaboration with the people who are most affected. So I want to show you a tool that is free that you can use for helping to ask residents about the problem according to them. So of course, you can call people on the phone, you can invite people to come in, but technology can be really helpful as a way to engage with people quickly and easily, quickly for you, and easily, and quickly and easily for them as well. This is a tool called All Our Ideas, which was developed out of Princeton University. It's free and open source. It's now currently maintained by a nonprofit called Citizens Foundation that creates free tools for citizen engagement. And this tool is very simple. So we used it in the state of New Jersey during COVID to ask people what was the most important issue for them in connection with their kids' education. It's very nice because you can give people a set of multiple choice responses. And what the system does is it asks you the question, and then it asks you which of these two things is more important to you. And you click on one, and then it asks you again. It randomly gives you answer choices. What's really nice about it is instead of giving people a 100-question questionnaire, they can respond in 2 seconds flat and answer as many times as they want to. You can go to All Our Ideas to try it out. They have a demo there, a sample. See how it works. It's super quick or easy. And then people can still write in their own responses if they don't want to take one of the pre-selected ones. But I find this pretty nifty because it's super easy both to set up and to use, and it's totally free. And it's a great way. We heard from 20,000 people in 2 weeks. The system gave us a prioritized list of challenges and problems as they experienced by students, caregivers and parents, and educators in the process. All of what we've told you today, the exercises and tips that we've discussed, exercises, etc., we're going to put links to, I believe, in the chat. I just want to show you, we have a section online called Articulating Your Problem, where we give you worksheets to do all of the things. So if you would like to do this for yourself, do these with your team, we have these available to you online, including the lasso exercise. And we will put, in addition to a link, I think what we'll do, which will be easier for people, is we'll put a PDF in the chat, which you can then download and print for yourself, save it, print it, use it with your team. I'm going to go here, and then we'll also share a link to some additional resources and videos, but the PDF will be most useful. Okay, let me stop with that.